The Gong Farmer. In medieval England, someone had to deal with what the rest of the town would rather forget. Gong farmers emptied cesspits and privies by hand, working only at night when the streets were empty and the smell was easier to ignore. The job paid surprisingly well for common labor, mostly because almost no one else was willing to do it. Waste was hauled outside city walls or sold as fertilizer, so the work carried a strange kind of value despite how it was viewed. The Groom of the Stool. At the royal courts of medieval and Tudor England, one of the most trusted positions in the palace involved assisting the king with his most private moments. The groom managed the monarch's toilet needs, and through that closeness gained access few nobles ever had. Conversations happened in that room that never happened anywhere else, and the groom often became a quiet advisor simply by being present when the king was most relaxed and unguarded. What looked like the lowest job in the palace was, in practice, one of the most powerful, since proximity to power meant more than the title ever suggested. The ale conner. Long before food safety inspectors existed, English towns relied on a specific official to make sure ale was fit to drink. The ale conner would pour a sample onto a wooden bench, then sit down on it wearing leather breeches and wait. If the ale contained enough sugar, it would turn sticky enough to hold the conner in place for a set amount of time. A rough but effective way to judge quality before modern testing existed. Brewers who failed the test faced fines or worse, and the position carried real civic weight in towns where ale was often safer to drink than the local water. The whipping boy. Raised alongside a young prince, a whipping boy shared the same lessons, the same tutors, and often a real friendship with the future king. But the arrangement existed for one specific reason. Royal children could not be physically punished by anyone beneath them, so when the prince misbehaved, the whipping boy took the punishment instead. Over time, the closeness between the two boys sometimes worked in the prince's favor in an unexpected way, since a prince who cared about his companion would try harder to behave, if only to spare him. The plague doctor. Recognizable by the long-beaked mask and heavy robes, plague doctors were hired by towns during outbreaks to treat the sick, wealthy or poor alike. The beak was packed with herbs and dried flowers, based on the belief that foul air itself spread disease. Their treatments rarely helped and sometimes caused more harm, but their presence gave frightened communities a sense that something was being done. Many plague doctors had little formal medical training, and some took the job purely for the pay, since regular physicians often refused to go near the infected at all. The Resurrectionist. As medical schools grew during the 18th and 19th centuries, they needed a steady supply of bodies to teach anatomy, and legal sources rarely kept up with demand. Resurrectionists filled that gap by digging up freshly buried corpses under cover of night and selling them to surgeons and universities. Families grew so fearful of the practice that iron cages, called mort safes, were built over graves to keep bodies from being taken. The trade existed in a strange legal gray area for decades, tolerated in practice even as it horrified the public whenever it was discovered. The Leech Collector. Before modern medicine, doctors relied heavily on bloodletting, and leeches became one of the most common tools for it. Leech collectors waded into ponds and marshes, often bare-legged, letting the creatures attach to their skin so they could be gathered and sold to apothecaries. It was slow, uncomfortable work, and repeated blood loss left many collectors weakened over the years they spent in the trade. As demand for leeches grew across Europe, wild populations dropped sharply, and the job itself became harder to sustain the more successful it was. The Knockerup. Before alarm clocks were affordable or reliable, factory and mill workers needed another way to wake up in time for early shifts. A knocker-up walked the streets before dawn, tapping on bedroom windows with a long pole, sometimes fitted with pea shooters for upper floors, until they heard a response. Regular customers paid a small weekly fee, and knockers-up often kept the same route for years, learning exactly how hard to knock for each sleeper. The job faded only once clocks became cheap enough for ordinary households to own one. The Lamplighter. Each evening, before electricity reached city streets, lamplighters walked set routes carrying a long pole with a small flame or wick at the end, lighting gas lamps one by one as darkness fell. They returned at dawn to put them out again, rain or clear skies making little difference to the schedule. The job required precise timing, since lighting too early wasted fuel and lighting too late left streets dark and dangerous. As electric lighting spread through cities, the role disappeared quietly, one street at a time. The chimney sweep. During the Industrial Revolution, narrow chimneys needed to be cleared of soot regularly to prevent fires, and small children were often sent inside to do it because they could fit where adults could not. The work was dangerous and left many sweeps with lasting health problems from constant smoke exposure. Master sweeps took on children as apprentices, sometimes very young, and the practice continued for decades before laws finally set stricter limits on age and working conditions. What began as a practical solution to a real hazard turned into one of the era's most criticized labor practices.